What I'm going to tell is not a joke. This is something I experienced and still don't understand. It happened 2 years ago, but even now, the memory clings to me like a shadow, refusing to fade. That night was ordinary, at least it should have been. I was in my sister's room, the dim glow of the screen flickering as I watched a movie, lost in the world of fiction, unaware that reality was about to twist into something I could never explain. The air was still, thick with the kind of silence that only exists in the dead of night. The only sounds were the hushed voices from the film, the occasional creak of the old wooden floor, the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. It was peaceful, mundane, the kind of night where nothing remarkable should have happened. It began with silence, the kind of silence that wraps around you in the dead of night, thick and unnatural, pressing against the walls like an unseen weight. The world outside was still, the sky ink black, a moonless void stretching infinitely above. I was in my sister's room, the dim glow of the laptop screen flickering against the walls as I let a movie fill the emptiness. It was nothing special, just another late-night distraction, something to lull my thoughts into stillness. But that night, stillness was impossible. It started as a feeling, a whisper of unease, barely perceptible, a sensation that crept up the back of my neck and settled in my chest. I ignored it at first, dismissing it as the byproduct of exhaustion, of an overactive imagination primed by the eerie quiet of the house. But then came the movement, a flicker at the edge of my vision, a shadow shifting beyond the window pane. My breath hitched, fingers tightening around the remote. Rationality was quick to intervene. Perhaps a tree branch swaying, a bird adjusting its perch. Simple, logical explanations. But then it happened again. A figure stood outside. She was draped in white, her presence unnervingly still, as though she had been carved from the night itself. A nun, or something pretending to be one. Her habit was pristine, untouched by wind or time. But something was wrong. There was no crucifix at her throat, only a stark red cross, unnatural in its vibrancy. And then there was her face, or rather, the absence of one. A void, a blankness that seemed to absorb the very fabric of reality around it. My chest tightened, the weight of her unseen stare pinning me in place. I could not look away. A primal terror rooted me to the spot, a certainty settling deep in my bones that whatever this was, it should not exist. My pulse hammered in my ears, the only sound against the suffocating stillness. And then, she moved. Not like a person, not like anything bound by the laws of motion. 1 second she was there, the next she wasn't. The shift was seamless, unnatural, as if space itself had rearranged to accommodate her absence. My breath came in sharp, shallow bursts. There was no time for rationalization, no way to convince myself it had been a trick of the light. I had seen her, and she had seen me. The hours that followed were a blur. Sleep was an impossibility. I left the laptop playing, the sound of the movie a fragile tether to normalcy, but it could not erase the memory of that empty face, that impossible movement. I told myself that by morning, the fear would fade, that daylight would wash away the lingering dread. But the morning brought something worse. A piece of paper lay on my nightstand. I did not remember putting it there. The drawing was simple, yet unmistakable. A figure, draped in white, standing in front of a door left slightly ajar. My breath hitched as realization clawed its way through my thoughts. The lines were mine. The smudges of graphite on my fingertips confirmed it. I had drawn her, but I did not remember doing it. The days that followed were a slow descent into something I could not name. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. Objects shifted in ways I could not explain. My reflection in the mirror felt delayed, a fraction of a second out of sync. Every night, I closed the curtains, locked the windows, turned on every light in my room. It didn't matter, because she was inside now. I heard her before I saw her again. A rustling sound, like fabric brushing against wood. Soft, deliberate movements in the darkness of my home. My breath turned shallow, my body frozen beneath the covers, my mind screaming for an explanation that refused to come. And then, in the dim reflection of the mirror across my room, I saw her, standing just behind me. The red cross seemed darker now, deeper, as if it had soaked something in. Her faceless void tilted slightly, not looking at me, but past me, as if something else was there. I did not turn. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but I was frozen, locked in place by a terror that wrapped around my ribs like a vice. My breath came in shallow gasps, my chest rising and falling in uneven, frantic rhythm. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it all to disappear, willing myself to wake up, but the darkness behind my eyelids was no refuge. My fists clenched at my sides, nails digging into my palms until sharp pain broke through the numbness. The air around me thickened, pressing in, growing heavy, suffocating. It felt like unseen hands, invisible fingers ghosting over my skin, creeping closer, closer, and then, nothing. The weight lifted. The presence ebbed away like a tide retreating into the abyss. The silence that followed was far worse than the sound. By morning, she was gone. But I knew the truth now. She had never just been watching. She had been waiting. And she still was. Towards nightfall, the breath caught in my throat as the spot where she had been standing yesterday, although it remained empty, a void darker than the night itself. The weight in my chest didn't lift. If anything, it grew heavier, as if something unseen still lingered beyond the glass. My fingers felt numb against the remote, and the room, once warm and familiar, now seemed foreign, hostile. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing against my eardrums with an unbearable intensity. I told myself to move, to get up, to do something, anything, but my body refused to obey. My skin was cold, clammy, my pulse erratic, hammering against my ribs like a desperate warning. My mind reeled, grasping at rationality, but there was no explanation, no logical sequence of events that could justify what I had just seen. The seconds stretched into eternity. I forced myself to breathe, slow and deep, willing my body to break free from the paralysis that had gripped it. My gaze flickered to the window again, half expecting to see her there once more, standing motionless, watching. But there was nothing, just the faint reflection of my own face, pale and drawn, eyes wide with unspoken fear. I reached for my phone with stiff fingers, my movements slow, deliberate, as if afraid that any sudden motion might summon her back. My hands trembled as I unlocked the screen. The time read 2:47 a.m. The numbers felt strangely significant, though I couldn't explain why. I tapped the flashlight icon, flooding the room with artificial light. The brightness did little to dispel the shadows clinging to the corners, but it made me feel marginally less vulnerable. I needed to check. Swallowing down the dread clawing at my throat, I forced myself to stand. My legs were unsteady beneath me, weak, as if I had been holding my breath for too long. Each step toward the window felt like a battle against an unseen force, but I refused to stop. Slowly, hesitantly, I reached out and pressed my fingers against the cool glass. Nothing. No trace of her presence. No sign that she had ever been there. But I knew how I felt. I let out a shaky breath, pressing my forehead against the window for a brief moment. My pulse was beginning to slow, though the unease remained, a festering sensation in the pit of my stomach. I turned away from the window, my body screaming for rest, for distance from whatever had just occurred. As I moved toward the bed, a flicker of movement in the reflection caught my eye. My breath hitched. I spun around, heart slamming against my ribs, but the window was empty. Yet, in the reflection, just for a split second, I had seen her, standing just behind me. A strangled gasp escaped my lips as I staggered backward, my body colliding with the edge of the bed. My hands flew to my mouth, stifling the sound before it could escape into the suffocating quiet of the room. I forced myself to turn, to scan the space behind me, but there was nothing. The door remained shut. The dim glow of my laptop screen flickered, casting faint, shifting light against the walls. The air was still, undisturbed, but I had seen her. The realization settled deep in my bones, an unshakable truth that refused to be rationalized away. She hadn't been outside anymore. She had been inside. I don't remember falling asleep. My last memory was of curling beneath the blankets, my body curled in on itself, the room flooded with the glow of my bedside lamp. Exhaustion had eventually pulled me under, though though my sleep was anything but peaceful. I dreamed of corridors, endless, winding hallways lined with closed doors, each identical to the last. The air was thick, oppressive, a low hum vibrating through the walls. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, distorted, as if the space itself was wrong, shifting with each step I took. The doors loomed around me, their surfaces smooth and unmarked, devoid of any handles or keyholes. There was no way to open them, no way to know what lay beyond. And then, at the end of the corridor, she stood, the faceless nun. The red cross burned against the white fabric of her gamp, stark, unnatural. Her arms hung limply at her sides, her presence a void that consumed everything around it. I tried to move, to turn away, but my body betrayed me. My limbs were leaden, my breath shallow. She lifted her hand, a slow, deliberate motion, and then she pointed, not at me, at the door closest to where I stood. A deep, resonant sound filled the air, a heavy, dragging noise that vibrated through my skull. The door creaked, shifting open by mere inches. Darkness beyond. Something moved in the void. I woke with a gasp, my body drenched in sweat, my heart slamming against my ribs. The room was too quiet, the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but filled with something unseen, lurking just beyond perception. I threw off the covers, my body trembling as I sat up. The air was thick, suffocating, and my head ached with the remnants of the dream. My eyes darted toward the window. The curtains were drawn, undisturbed. The bedside lamp still cast its warm glow across the room. But something was different. I didn't notice it at first. Not until I reached for my phone, my fingers brushing against something that shouldn't have been there. A new sheet of paper. Frowning, I picked it up, my breath catching as I turned it over. A drawing, done in my own hand. The faceless nun, her form towering, her arms outstretched. A door behind her, partially open, and within that darkness, my fingers went numb, the paper slipping from my grasp. I hadn't drawn this, but my pencil lay beside the page, faint smudges of graphite staining my fingertips. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just a dream, and I wasn't alone. It started subtly, so subtly that I could have ignored it, dismissed it as tricks of the mind, as fatigue, as anything but what it really was. The feeling of being watched never truly left, lingering in the background like an unwanted presence. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound carried weight, every reflection felt just a second too slow. I told myself it was paranoia, that the mind plays cruel games when given the right amount of fear. And yet, deep down, I knew better. The first thing I noticed was the movement in the corners of my vision. Flickers of white, like fabric slipping around the edges of doorways, vanishing the moment I turned my head. It happened in the hallway, in the living room, even in my own bedroom when the lights were low. I stopped watching movies at night. I stopped looking out the windows. But none of it made a difference. One evening, I was brushing my teeth when I felt it again. That creeping sensation of being watched, of something standing just outside my line of sight. I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the sink as I forced myself to look up. The bathroom mirror reflected my tired face, the dim yellow light casting harsh shadows beneath my eyes. Nothing else, nothing unusual. And then, a shift. Not in the mirror itself, but behind me. The door was open just a crack, barely an inch of darkness visible beyond it. But in that darkness, in that impossibly narrow space, I saw it. White fabric, motionless, pressed against the void like something waiting just beyond reach. My breath hitched. I turned so fast I nearly lost my balance, my hands slamming against the counter as I spun toward the door. But there was nothing, just the empty hallway beyond, stretching out into the rest of the house. A trick of the light, a shadow, a hallucination. I repeated these words over and over again, gripping onto them like a lifeline. But no amount of repetition could erase the image burned into my mind. That white fabric, standing there, waiting. I started keeping the doors closed after that. Every room, every hallway. I even blocked the windows with thick curtains, refusing to give the outside world a way in. It made me feel safer, but safety was an illusion. I began to avoid mirrors, at least, I tried to. The more I looked into them, the more it seemed like something was wrong. The reflection was always a fraction off, as though it wasn't quite mine. At night, after a long day, I would catch a glimpse of myself in the bathroom mirror while brushing my teeth. But sometimes, the face that stared back at me wasn't quite right. It would linger a second too long, its expression frozen in something I couldn't quite decipher, like a faint, ghostly smile just beneath the surface. At first, I thought it was exhaustion. Maybe the stress was starting to catch up with me. But as the days passed, the feeling began to seep into everything. The quiet whispers, the flickers in the corners of my vision, the strange pressure that settled in my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. It wasn't just paranoia. It was something else. Something real. The worst part was how subtle it all was. I couldn't point to a single event that would make anyone else believe me. It wasn't like a sudden door slamming shut or a loud noise that couldn't be explained. It was the subtlety that drove me mad. The way it seemed like the world around me was slowly shifting, becoming just slightly out of focus, like someone had brushed a veil across my perception. One evening, I went into the kitchen to grab a drink, my mind still clouded with exhaustion. The air felt thick, heavy, like the atmosphere itself had changed. As I opened the fridge door, I caught a glimpse of something moving in the reflection of the glass. Something white. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. I whipped around, but again, nothing. The room was empty, silent. My heart raced as I glanced back at the reflection, but it was just me standing there, trembling, a fool lost in the grip of fear. I couldn't escape it. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was in the air. I started noticing how certain areas of the house felt colder, even when the heater was running, and how sounds seemed to echo differently, like the walls themselves were changing. Was I losing my mind? Or was something else happening? I didn't know, and I didn't know how much longer I could live like this. It wasn't long before I started noticing the figure again. White fabric, always out of the corner of my eye, always just barely there, as if it was waiting for me to acknowledge it. Always just beyond reach, but closer than before. I began to wonder if it was in my head, or if it was something real, something following me, something that had always been there. The more I tried to ignore it, the more persistent it became. And soon, I realized that ignoring it was no longer an option, because the next time I saw her, it was not outside. It was not a flicker in my peripheral vision. She was inside. It was past midnight when it happened. The house was silent, the kind of silence that felt unnatural, too deep, too heavy. I was in bed, my phone screen the only source of light, scrolling mindlessly, trying to chase away the exhaustion without closing my eyes. The moment I closed them, I knew I would see her again. And then, a sound, soft, faint, barely more than a whisper. But it was there. A rustling noise, like fabric brushing against wood. My breath hitched. My pulse slammed against my ribs as I forced myself to sit up, ears straining against the silence. Nothing. I waited, body tense, listening. Then, another sound. A step. Not the creak of the floorboards under pressure. Not the distant sound of a shifting house, but something else. A footstep against the wooden floor. Slow, deliberate. Inside the room, I couldn't move. My body locked in place, my hands gripping the sheets so tightly my knuckles ached. And then I saw it. Not directly. Not at first. A stupid mirror in my closet that I didn't take down. It stood across from my bed, reflecting the dim glow of my phone screen, casting pale light against the darkness of the room. And within that reflection, she stood, behind me, a shape draped in white, unmoving, silent. The red cross stark against her gamp, more vivid than before, almost as if it had deepened in color. But there was something else. Her head was tilted, just slightly, a fraction of an inch, not looking at me, but past me, as if there was something else in the room. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't turn around. I knew with absolute certainty, that if I turned, if I dared to acknowledge her presence fully, something irreversible would happen. Instead, I shut my eyes, tight. My breathing came in ragged gasps, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst from my chest. I squeezed my hands into fists, nails digging into my palms, grounding myself in the sensation of pain. And then, nothing. No sound. No movement. Just silence. I didn't open my eyes until the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, painting weak golden lines across the room. Only then did I dare to move, to look at the mirror again. She was gone, but the feeling remained. Something had changed that night. She was no longer just watching. She was getting closer. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of paranoia and exhaustion. Sleep became a fleeting luxury, slipping through my fingers like sand. Every shadow seemed to breathe. Every flicker of movement sent jolts of panic down my spine. The sketchbook remained where I had left it, the image untouched yet omnipresent in my mind. No matter how much I tried to ignore it, the faceless nun lingered. Not just in my peripheral vision, but in the atmosphere itself, pressing against reality like a presence that did not belong. I stopped drawing. I stopped sitting at my desk altogether. But avoidance was useless. The disturbances escalated. Objects moved more noticeably now. Doors left half open when I was certain I had closed them. My phone shifting from my nightstand to my desk without explanation. The chair at my desk always slightly pulled out, as if someone had been sitting there. The air felt heavier, charged with an energy I couldn't rationalize. I told myself it was my mind playing tricks on me, that fear had poisoned my thoughts to the point of delusion. But the breaking point came one night, when I woke to a sound that did not belong. A whisper. Not words, not distinct, but a murmur. Like the rustling of fabric against stone, the hushed breath of something not entirely human. I lay frozen in my bed, my body refusing to move, my breathing shallow. The sound came from the direction of my desk. My pulse thundered in my ears as I reached for my phone, desperate for light. And then I saw her, not in the mirror, not in the window, but in the room. Standing by my desk, her form was more solid than ever before, no longer a fleeting glimpse or a distant figure beyond the glass. She was here, in my space, the habit draped over her body like a shroud, the red cross vivid against the stark white, and her head, the jagged crown, the faceless void where a face should have been, a black absence, an emptiness that swallowed the dim glow of my phone screen. She did not move, but I felt something shift, as though the air between us bent, as though she was pressing forward without motion. The room seemed to shrink, my breath caught in my throat, and in that moment, I knew without a doubt, she was waiting. For what? I didn't want to know. I acted on pure instinct. My body finally obeyed as I scrambled up, my hand flying to the lamp beside my bed. The moment my fingers brushed the switch, the light flooded the room, and she was gone. But something else remained. The sketchbook. It was open on my desk, flipped to a page I had never seen before. My hands trembled as I forced myself to step closer, my stomach twisting with dread. Another drawing. This time, it wasn't just her. It was me. A crude, frantic depiction of myself sitting in my bed, a figure standing over me, draped in white, crowned in jagged black. The pencil strokes were harsh, almost violent, as if drawn in desperation. But the worst part was my own face. There was none. The same void, the same nothingness, mirrored in my own reflection. Something inside me snapped. The fear, the exhaustion, the sheer impossibility of what was happening coalesced into a single, desperate act. I grabbed the sketchbook and tore the page out, crumpling it in my fist. My breath was ragged as I stumbled back, my pulse pounding in my ears. Burn it. The thought came unbidden, urgent. I rushed to my window, throwing it open, the cold night air biting against my skin. My hands shook as I reached for my lighter, flicking it once, twice, until the tiny flame danced in the dark. I hesitated. Would it work? Would it even matter? I didn't know, but I had to try. The paper caught quickly, the flames licking up the edges, devouring the twisted image in seconds. I watched as the embers curled, as the last remnants of the drawing turned to ash, disappearing into the wind. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something shift. The room no longer felt suffocating. The air felt lighter. The weight pressing against my chest lifted, if only slightly. That night, I slept, and for a time, I believed it was over. But it wasn't. A week passed. No strange noises. No inexplicable movements. No sightings of the faceless nun. I forced myself to believe that whatever had plagued me was gone, that burning the drawing had severed its hold. Life returned to something resembling normalcy, though the memories still clung to me like remnants of a nightmare. Then, one evening, as I walked past my desk, I noticed something. The sketchbook. It was closed, but there was something beneath it. Another single sheet of paper. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening as I reached out, dread curling in my stomach like a living thing. Slowly, I lifted the sketchbook, revealing the page beneath. A new drawing, but this time not my hands, not my pencil. And yet, there it was. The nun. The same jagged crown. The same faceless void. And this time, she was not alone. Figures surrounded her, shadowy, indistinct, lined up in rows behind her like a silent congregation. And at the bottom of the page, scrawled in sharp, erratic script, were 4 words. "You are one of US." My breath faltered. The words, "You are one of US," burned in my vision, searing themselves into my thoughts. My fingers twitched, instinct telling me to tear it apart, to burn it, to rid myself of its presence. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. The damage had already been done. A whisper drifted through the room, soft as breath against my ear. "Come." I spun, but no one was there. Only the mirror, its surface rippling as though disturbed by an unseen hand. And then, the darkness within it shifted. Something was moving inside. The nun, the faceless entity, the impossible presence that had been with me since that night outside my window. She was no longer just watching. She was reaching. A pale hand, long and unnatural, pressed against the glass from the other side, the fabric of her sleeve billowing in a wind that did not exist in my world. The figures behind her loomed, their indistinct forms shifting like smoke, waiting. A chorus of whispers rose around me, their words just beyond understanding, weaving through the air like an incantation. The pressure in my skull built, my own thoughts drowning beneath the weight of their voices. This was it. I was being pulled in. I stumbled away from the mirror, but the room was wrong now, stretched and distorted. The door was further than it had been before, the walls curving inward, enclosing me. I reached for the handle, my fingers grasping at empty air as the space around me twisted, warping under an unseen force. The mirror pulsed, and I felt it. Something inside me shifting, unraveling, being rewritten. My reflection flickered back into existence. But it wasn't me. It was something else, something that mimicked my shape, my movements. But the eyes, my eyes, were hollow, black voids that bled into the rest of my face. The nun's mark, the red cross, burned at the hollow of my throat. My doppelganger tilted its head, studying me with a fascination that sent ice through my veins. Then, slowly, its lips curved into a smile. I was not smiling. The whispers crescendoed, a deafening cacophony of voices layering over one another, their meaning suddenly clear. You were chosen. You were called. Now you belong. The mirror shattered, not outward, not in shards of broken glass, but inward, as though the world beyond it had collapsed into itself, pulling everything with it. A force stronger than gravity seized me, and the last thing I saw before the void swallowed me whole was my reflection stepping forward, taking my place in the world I had left behind. And then, a heavy, all-encompassing silence. I cannot say how long it has been. Time has no meaning here, not in this place where everything stretches on forever. Yet somehow, I feel as if I am trapped in a space too small for comfort. The figures that were once standing behind the nun, those unknown entities, have now moved beside me. I do not see them as I used to. No, it's not the same. The vision I once had is gone, replaced by a different kind of awareness. A knowing that is not based on sight, but on sensation. I can feel them now. I can hear them, even if I can't describe the sounds. And in a way that I cannot fully understand, I have melded with them. I am not the same as I once was, not entirely. It's as though something inside me has shifted, twisted, until I no longer feel fully separate from the figures around me. I can sense them now, as if our boundaries have blurred, merged in some inexplicable way. I am part of what stands beside me, what hovers just beyond the edge of my awareness. I am neither here nor there, but somehow I am everywhere they are. I do not sleep, nor do I require sleep. I no longer breathe in the way I used to, nor do I think the same. My thoughts are not my own, at least not in the way they used to be. They are foreign, disjointed, and distant, as though I have been separated from my former self. But still, I watch. I wait. Somewhere far away, in a house much like my own, a young girl sits alone in the quiet of the night. The only light in the room is the cold, artificial glow of her laptop screen, casting faint shadows across her face. She does not hear the world outside. It is as still as the air before a storm, as if the earth itself is holding its breath. She has no idea, not yet, at least. As she types, her fingers moving rhythmically across the keys, there's something else there. Something just beyond her peripheral vision. A shadow, perhaps. A flicker. A presence. I am there, standing in the darkness, just out of view, watching her, waiting. And soon enough, she will see me.